Okay. Are we live? It is 6:30, sir. With your permission. Achha, Dr. Waluwalia is just like. So we are live and very happy to share with all the panelists here. We are a full house right now. It's 500 participants. So people who are not able to join here will please move to YouTube. Dr. Ahluwalia, with your permission, we are now ready to go live.
Wonderful.
Shall we start? Yes.
Go right ahead.
Yes, sir. So good evening and warm greetings. Welcome to the fourth lecture under the IHT-ISLE webinar series, COVID-19 and its implications for economy, work, and livelihoods. I am Priyanka Tyagi, Senior Manager, Program Administration and Communication with Institute for Human Development, which also hosts the Indian Society of Labour Economic Secretariat. The IHT and ISLE are extremely delighted that Padma Bhushan Professor Kaushik Basu, CMARCS Professor, Cornell University, former Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, and former Chief Economist, the World Bank, will be delivering this lecture titled The Pandemic and the Changing Structure of the World Economy, India's Big Opportunity and Big Risk, a pertinent topic in present times. And for me personally, this is indeed a great honor to be sharing screen space with all of you. So a very warm welcome to you, Professor Basu. The webinar is being moderated by Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. He's the former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission. A warm welcome to you, Dr. Ahluwalia. We are very grateful to you for agreeing to moderate this lecture. And before I call upon Professor Alakhen Sharma, a formal welcome to all who will do the formal welcome and the introductions. I would like to thank all the attendees, all the participants for their overwhelming response to our webinar series and to this particular web lecture in particular, because we've received close to 2,600 registrations. However, as we have mentioned in our invitation, that we are constrained to accommodate only 500 people. So, but we are also going live on YouTube. So I would request all of you, people who are not able to join here, may please move to YouTube. You can engage with us through the comment box on YouTube as well. Your questions will be placed before the moderator, I'm sure. And I would now call upon Dr. Alakhen Sharma, the Director of the Institute for Human Development. Professor Sharma is a known labor and development economist who has worked extensively on employment issues in India. He's also the editor of Indian Journal of Labor Economics, which is the Indian Society of Labour Economics Journal. So it's over to you, Professor Alak Sharma, for the formal commencement of the proceedings of this web lecture.
Thank you, Priyanka. On behalf of the Institute for Human Development and Indian Society of Labour Economics, I extend my warm welcome to Professor Kaushik Basu, Dr. Montek Ahluwalia, and all the attendees who have joined this webinar. As my colleague Priyanka just said, that this is a series, IHD and ISLE series, which we have started since April. Web lectures, also panel discussions have been held, and we also organize a two-day major international conference on labor and employment and COVID-19 in India in partnership with ILO. But we consider this lecture to be very important one in this entire series. This is a very important question. The world economy is being impacted in a way which hardly any event in history, including probably the Great Depression, has impacted the world economy and all that. And the question which Kaushik is going to address his lecture, who is going to be winners and losers? How India should perform? This is a natural question that which is coming to the mind of everybody. So that is why so much interest. Of course, we have a star powers in this event, both Dr. Walia and Dr. Kaushik Basu. But the topic is very also important and challenging one. And I'm very happy that, excited that Kaushik took this challenge, and I'm grateful to him. Kaushik and Dr. Walia, the both of them did no introduction, but just to, in case somebody has missed, just to, for the attendees. Kaushik, as you know, is a professor of economics in Cornell University. He is also former chief economic advisor, Government of India, former chief economist of the World Bank. Kaushik has been professor in Delhi School of Economics for a long time, where he also founded the Center for Development Economics. He is also currently, and this is very important to note, the president of the International Economic Association. He has been visiting professors to several universities in the world, US and UK, including Harvard, Princeton, MIT, and all that. His contributions in the development economics, welfare economics, industrial organizations, and game theory has been widely noted. And he has published several books and contributed papers on this topic. More important, Kaushik has also written both popular articles in newspapers and also popular books, which can be read even by non-economists. Kaushik, in recognition of his services, was awarded the Padma Bhushan by Government of India. He has also been awarded several honorary degrees, including doctorate from IIT Bombay, Fordham University, Newark, and Bath University, England. Dr. Montek Singh Alwadia, as I said, is another star who is moderating this session, this webinar. He's an eminent economist, civil servant, and as we know, he was deputy chairman of the Government of India Planning Commission for 10 years. He held several positions in Government of India since 1980s. He has been Secretary Commerce, Secretary Economic Affairs, and several other positions. He was Secretary to the Prime Minister, and his contribution in policy making and economics and development economics is widely noted. In 2001, he was appointed the first director of the IMS Independent Evaluation Office. Currently, he is a distinguished visiting professor at the Newark Stern School of Business. I won't take much time because all of you must be waiting for Kaushik lectures, but I would like to thank Kaushik and Dr. Walia, both of them, for accepting our invitation and making this event really wonderful. So thank you very much. So, yes, Dr. Walia, now in your hands.
Well, yes, let me just correct you on one thing, by the way. I'm not a distinguished visiting professor at the New York University Stern School. I was for one term in 2015. So you're looking at an old CV.
Okay.
So, I see that Kaushik has disappeared, which is very shrewd of him.
He has come back.
Yeah, all right, okay.
Yes, now you have to start. Dr. Loladia, you have to start now.
Oh, I didn't realize. I thought I was moderator meant I came into the act after the questions began. But anyway, let me just say thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be at this lecture. I'm really looking forward to hearing Kaushik. And rule number one of advertising is that if you've got a good product, don't talk about it, just put it out in front. So Kaushik, over to you. I'm sure that everybody wants to hear what you have to say. Certainly I do. Thank you.
Montek, thank you very much. Alak, thank you for inviting me. Priyanka, for this very smooth organization. We'll have to wait an hour and a half to see if it all runs smoothly, but thank you very much, all of you. These are dismal times, but still it's a pleasure to be with friends and to be talking to people, I suppose largely in India, but there may be some also abroad. People get annoyed when economists talk about the future, trying to say what it will be like. We often get it wrong. So I have to warn you that there is double reason for annoyance today, because the lecture is going to be a mixture of economics and epidemiology. So you have two reasons to get angry with an economist treading here, but we have no choice. And I will tell you that all this has to be done with a certain humility of being aware that there are so many things in life that we do not know. But this is a challenge. This is a global challenge, really no one's special challenge, and we have to put our best minds to it. I came into the problem, sort of confronted the problem and how transformed a world we live in a very unusual way. I had gone in March to India. I was supposed to give the Raja Chelaya lecture, and I remember that end of February, early March, my head was just full of fiscal policy, taxation policy. I was getting ready for the Chelaya lecture in Delhi. Spending a few days in Bombay before going to Delhi, when the situation started getting worse. We already knew it was coming, but the lecture had to be cancelled. Soon after that, flights were stopped, lockdown began, and there I was with just a suitcase. I had gone and stuck for 3 months, luckily in pleasant enough circumstances, but it was difficult to come to terms with a world that had changed so very dramatically. 3-4 months, your mind is thinking, preoccupied with other things than what your mind used to be preoccupied with earlier. And we are hobbling out of it, and hobbling out of it only because we are getting used to it. Not that the reality is changing very fast, but we are beginning to get used to it. We are coping with it. There are people with anxiety, with loneliness and depression, and I will try to tell you that through all this depressing, dismal scenario, there is also actually hope and reason not to be as depressed and as anxious as we are. But my main preoccupation today is with the economy. And what I'm going to cover is not really so much about the pandemic or epidemiology. I'm joking about that. I will take the numbers as we get it, and then speculate a little bit into the future. What might the world look like when we emerge out of this? Which countries will be the winners? Which countries are likely to be the losers? What are in particular India's prospects? I will look at India at length. So I am peering into the future, but Alak asked me to do that, and who can say no to Alak when he makes a request? So that's what I'm going to do some speculation into the future and how we can, through all this, come out better. A little bit of the background. These numbers change every day. I picked up the numbers a day before yesterday, I think. So right now, globally, 16 million cases, 650,000 deaths. It must have gone up a little bit more in the last one day. 650,000 deaths. I'm telling you this to remember that when you're in the midst of this, of course, this is the worst thing that can happen. And I have to say, over the last 4 or 5 months, I'm beginning to feel better now. I was feeling weighed down. How did the world change so dramatically from the world that I knew? But when you look back and think of other pandemics, I asked people about the Hong Kong flu of 1968. Most people are not even aware, people who live there. I mean, I was a 16-year-old during the Hong Kong flu. I have no awareness of that. There are lots of people who don't know. The Hong Kong flu killed a little over 1 million people. Right now, it's over 650,000. We can go there, we can overtake that. But the Hong Kong flu was a major flu. Before that, 1958, 57, 58 was the Asian flu, which killed more than 1.1 million people. Some people will say it killed 2 million people. Those days, the counting was not that good. Major global pandemic. People are not aware of that. We talk about the Spanish flu of 1918, 19, everyone talks about it, but that is way bigger than what is happening now. So it's a bad situation currently. We have to worry about it. We have to put our best minds about how to deal with it, but we also must not get it out of proportion. Another thing that we should remember is a lot of the behavioral requirements that you don't interact with too many people, that you wear masks, maintain social distance. Disproportionately, the requirement for this is for social reasons. It's not because it is such a lethal ailment that once you get it, you're finished. It's not really that. But if you get it, you will pass on to 2 more people. Those 2 people will pass on to 4 more people, those 4 to 8 more people, and it goes in geometric progression. So it's your social responsibility to behave in the right way. Your own dangers, as I keep saying jokingly, that when you go by long distance in India by road, you're probably taking a bigger risk because the accidental death risk is actually very, very high. So we should realize a lot of this behavior should be because of our being socially responsible. I will come to numbers soon, but also want to tell you, and I will show you the COVID numbers only because to me it becomes clear that so much of it we don't know. Another reason for the anxiety, when I was sitting in Bombay, I was on the phone continuously with old friends and linking up, and also in our building complex, we were in an apartment. There were others with whom we would get to chat a little bit. The uncertainty, the feeling was that we have got into an uncertain world. Here I have one reminder that actually we always live in an uncertain world. We do not fully understand the world we live in. There's risks that we have big risks today, but we've always had big risks. And we live as though we don't have the risks, which is a bit of a folly, fortunate folly. We go about life thinking it's all certainty, but it is not. And this is a reminder, a little bit of recommendation to you on philosophy I find very useful. If you read the Greek skeptic philosophers, that what you see around you, anyway, you don't know. It is through your perception. You're probably making lots of mistakes. Over time, we get confident because we are seeing roughly the same thing, and we begin to feel foolishly comfortable. And there's some goodness in that foolish comfort that we feel. So read a little bit of the Greek philosophers on skepticism, read David Hume on skepticism about doubt, and listen to Swami Sarvapriyananda on Maya, from the Ramakrishna mission, which is reminding you of the same philosophical point of view, that there is reason for doubt. That's the backdrop. Let me get into, I will come into some numbers and show you. I'm going to put off a phone, which is coming on. I don't know why. I'm going to get into numbers, but before that, I want to tell you why, in terms of fundamentals, I feel very good about India. I feel the way the world is going to come out of the pandemic, when it does, India will have certain fundamental strengths and very specific fundamental strengths whereby India could really come out right on top. But I will say at the outset that I also have worries, very deep worries, seeing recent trends in what's happening in India, that we may end up messing it up and may not be able to realize the fundamental strengths that we have with us. That, in a nutshell, is going to be my message: great fundamentals, but with risks. Let me point to 2 different trends in the world which were already there before the pandemic, and I have to do a little bit of sharing for this. Let me see if I can do that successfully.
We can see your screen now, sir.
Yes, can you see what I'm trying to share? It should open up just now. Let me see for a moment.
Yes, sir. Your PowerPoint is open. Yes, that's right.
Is it there?
That's there, sir. Yes, sir. Okay.
I will come into what I want to tell you in a moment. I feel that there were 2 global trends which are going to become bigger. So when we come out of the pandemic, we will have to contend with these changes which will become sharper. I don't think in the end the world will be a completely transformed world, as some people say, but there will be changes. And you have to remember that unlike the previous pandemics, which happened in the age of pre-social media, the pandemic was larger, but our reaction was smaller. Whereas now, a part of the problem is by the fact that we are reacting in a very big way because we are getting news every 2 minutes. And that reaction itself is changing the world. Part of it is for the better. We are better at medicine, better at reacting, but a part of it is also causing panic and changing the structure of the world. There were some trends, and in particular, I want to talk about two, which I feel will get exacerbated by what is happening today in terms of the pandemic. The first trend is this one. All over the world, and especially in rich countries and in upper middle income countries. India, in formal classification, is lower middle income country, but upper middle income countries and rich countries, the fraction of the GDP, national income, that goes to workers has been decreasing for the last 40 years. More than that, last 40 years, we have detailed data. What you have in front right now on my screen is the trend in, if you take the GDP and the share of the GDP which is earned by workers as wages, which in 1976 in Japan would be 77% of the GDP was workers' income, and now it is something like 59% is workers' income, 77 to 59. Japan is a striking movement, but take any rich country, that share is decreasing, the share that is going to workers. This is, of course, first of all, causing a lot of the political problem and anger that, look, we are losing our jobs and workers are becoming worse off. And that is indeed true. If this was a lecture I was giving to an American audience or a European audience, I would talk about some of the policies that you need to undertake here, but that's not over here. That's not the occasion. Now, what is this doing? What's causing this is important because on one of them, India has an advantage, which I think an advantage which is going to exacerbate and become a bigger advantage. There are two reasons for this trend in the labor share going down in wages in rich countries. Number one, labor saving technology. This is, every time there is a breakthrough in technology, typically it takes the form of some boring labor is taken away from the hands of the workers and a machine begins to perform that task for you. This is true not just today, this was true from the Stone Age. When the first stone implements were invented, discovered, I don't know what term you use for that, from the first little stone implements, you are displacing labor. So this is a trend that has gone on for a long time. But there is another trend that has added on. So this is labor saving technology, started in the Stone Age, continuing till today. The digital age and the digital transformation is causing this to speed up. But there's another change. I call this the labor linking technology. This is new. Technology whereby labor can be linked so that for a whole range of different kinds of work, you don't have to migrate from Bangalore to New York to work for people who need your product in New York. For a corporation that may have a headquarters in London, you can continue to sit in Bangalore and function for that. This is labor linking technology. The digital age has given us this, and this is affecting the rich countries in a very big way. This kind of a revolution, this technology, the labor linking technology, is one where India has a very, very natural advantage. Right from 1991, when the reforms, you did need the reforms, removing the license permit Raj came, so the government played a role in creating that space. And then there were the big players who really, this was a historic move, Infosys, Wipro, Tata Group, they were coming into the information technology space, and India became the world's biggest player in the information technology outsourcing business. Here, I feel this is going to be an advantage for India, the early investment that we have made in this, for the following reason. That this already the 6 months that you have seen, and we will be seeing more of what happens panning out over the next 6 months, maybe a year and a half, depending on when the vaccine comes, this will continue. The world is becoming much more at ease in digital connectivity. I was not used to giving Zoom lectures till 3-4 months ago. And now all the time I'm speaking on Zoom, conducting meetings on Zoom and WebEx and other technologies being used. As the world comes out into that state where we are all much more technology friendly and we can sit in faraway places and work for faraway places, I feel the labor linking technology is going to increase in leaps and bounds. So what was delivered to India's doorstep, thanks to the Indian corporations, which played a pioneering role, as I said, Infosys, Wipro, Tata Group, there were several others, played a pioneering role, that is going to get accentuated. The one risk to that, and this has been talked about a lot, I know Emmanuel Macron has talked, and he's quite a statesman, you have to take it seriously, that there is a risk of deglobalization. So an advantage that will come towards India through natural means may get damaged by political movements of closed economy. So United States may say that we are not going to outsource anymore. Another big country may say we will not outsource anymore. So we are not going to use these global linkages. I have to say, I don't worry about that very much. The country that once you live in a globalized world, a country that tries to stop globalization by closing its doors, building walls, will be outcompeted by other countries that don't do that. So if there is a country, let's pretend France says that we are not going to outsource anymore. What will happen is France will get outcompeted on the product market by Germany, which will use the cheaper labor through outsourcing. China may use the cheaper labor through outsourcing and outcompete this. So the reason why these hyper-nationalism that you're seeing in certain countries, and I understand and sympathize with that because people are becoming worse off, they are worried, but they are directing their worry in the wrong direction. In the United States, in European countries where the hyper-nationalism is not the right reaction because you will get defeated in the long run. And history is replete with cases of competitive situation in the world where the country that closes its borders does worse than the country that remains relatively open. There are historical episodes where United States has been the biggest winner in the past by keeping its door open to skill, to labor, to products, to services coming in, and it managed to outcompete. So I feel the competitive pressure in the long run will put globalization back in place, even if it does suffer for 1 or 2 years. So for India, the scope here is huge, and we have to pick up on that. The second one, where India has a big, second one is actually 2 parts. 2 areas where I feel the world is going to see major growth will be health sector is going to grow and education. Education, I will actually keep it aside. I've written extensively on the importance of education and how India could play a major role, but let me just pause on health for a moment. Our rapid growth all over the world is hurting the environment. There are people who are saying that we have to slow down on growth. I don't take that view. My own view is we have to change the components of growth. You have to remember a GDP is in the end quite an abstract thing. It's all the things that we value, the growth of these things. So if we value cars and homes, then GDP grows only by having more cars and more homes. But if we begin to value better health, then GDP could grow by just giving people better health. And there are people who would pay a huge amount of money to get another 3 additional years of life, 5 additional years of life, less pain, healthier existence. Lots of people would spend on that. My expectation is that the health sector, we will continue to see massive growth, but that growth will take the form of the health sector becoming much better. And in terms of better health, the scope is endless. You can have better health, but for that you need research in the medical sector. You need pharmaceutical industries doing well. This is a sector that is going to grow. India, again, there's Biocon, Cipla, Dabur. India in the pharmaceutical sector, for instance, is very, very well positioned that if the world goes that route, India can come on top because it has already early investments. It's globally recognized as a major player. I'll briefly touch on something that I have talked about earlier a lot, is education. If higher education becomes important and a lot of the education begins to take place by Zoom and WebEx and long distance technology, India with its advantage, two advantages, very early investment in higher education, the 60s, 70s, 80s, is in a position to take advantage of this and become a global hub for education. So people zoom in from around the world, get education which is being provided by India, and India begins to earn money out of this, which can be used on its own country. So these are the fields which I think will become very big over time if we come out of the pandemic well. Who knows? I mean, life is full of uncertainty. We can mess it up and we can go the dinosaur route. I like to believe that the best of our senses will prevail. We'll come out of it. And within a few years, these will be the trends. And in these areas, India has initial advantages. So I feel hopeful, but India also has big risks, which did not start with the COVID, a bit before that, but it is continuing. And I want to point to the risk, which a lot of people are beginning to write about, that despite these great hopes, what has happened over the last 6 months is very depressing. India is not showing signs of picking up on this advantage. In fact, things are beginning to deteriorate. It would be less worrying if the deterioration was just over these 6 months. We would say it's a short-run problem, we'll get out of it. But actually, the deterioration has started before that, and I want to discuss that. And I want to stress to you that these things have to be conducted in non-political terms. You have to look at the numbers, you have to admit to failures, rejoice on successes. That's the only way to move ahead. And one of the reasons why we are beginning to do badly is because we are not admitting to the flaws. It's everything is a drumbeat of, are you on this side or are you on that side? That is not the way in which you do successful policy. The growth story now, the India growth story, Montek will be very familiar with this. A whole lot of people in my audience will be very familiar, but let me just give you some of the numbers now.
So may I request you to please share your full screen?
Oh, am I not doing that?
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, was it much worse? But anyway, there are more important things to come. The previous slide was relatively less important. And let me just move these pictures a little bit. Yeah, and do stop me, Priyanka, if there's any thing that is causing the people not to get the full picture. Okay, here are growth. I have picked up 2 sets of years. Sorry, the coloring over here, I'm not a great expert in this. I should have done the coloring a bit differently. I've taken 2 batches, 2 periods in India, 2003 to 2008, which were really outstanding years for India. From 2003, India's growth rate is beginning to look fantastic, 7.9%, 7.9% for 2 years, then goes up to 9.3, 9.2, 10.2. It starts with Vajpayee in 2003, Manmohan Singh comes in a bit after that, and it's an absolutely outstanding period. Immediately after that, there is a downer, and there is a period, 1 year downer actually, with the Great Depression. After that, it picks up again, fluctuations. 14, 15, then I'm going to another column. Look at this column on the right-hand side, which is 2016 to now. Before that, for 2 years, the growth was beginning to pick up. The world had been through a hard time. That was fine. 16, 17, India's growth is 8.2%, not quite as good as the glorious years, but India's doing well. Look at the year after that. It's gone down a little bit, 7.2%. I more or less know the problems that is causing it to happen. Then go 1 more year, it's down again, 6.1%. Last year, before the pandemic hit, India is down to 4.2%. If you look at charts of growths, India used to be in the top 3 in the world, but by last year, India's in the 43rd or 42nd in the world, fastest growing country. It has dropped. 2021, where is India going? The IMF's last forecast is minus 4.5 for the next year. But IMF, if you look at the last 6 months, every time it's coming up with a new forecast, India's dropping down, IMF is correcting downwards. So if you continue to extend that trend, it's probably worse. But Economist Intelligence Unit is minus 5.8 for India. And there, in this period, 2003 to 2008, India used to be consistently in the top 3. India has now dropped down with minus 5.8. The most worrying forecast has come from within India. ICRA, our rating agency, has put India's growth rate forecast as minus 9.5%. Whether it is minus 5.8 or minus 9.5. First of all, I should tell you, this in itself, this year's performance that we are getting into, that is actually, I don't want to put it at anyone's doorstep. It's your fault or my fault. The world is in a very difficult situation. It is true India is doing worse than many other countries, but it's a very difficult situation. We are all guessing what's the right policy, so a little bit. But if we go to a growth rate of minus 5.8, you don't have to go to minus 9.5, minus 5.8, you should realize that's going to be the lowest growth India has ever had since data has been recorded, certainly ever since 1947. From 1947, the worst year for India was 1979-80, when India grew by minus 5.2%. So the economy shrank by 5.2%. So next year is going to be an all-time record of India's growth collapse. As I'm saying, the 1 year is okay. I would go with it, but I have worries about the future, and that is what I want to go into more. The future worry is that the drop in growth rate trend was already there. And I think some of the reasons, one of them is to do with the savings and investment rate going down. The savings and investment rate of India by 2009 had reached the level which was like the super fast growing East Asian economies, 38%, 37, 38% of the GDP being saved and invested. I have to say it began dropping a little bit soon after that. And there is no getting away from the fact that I was chief economic advisor to the government when it dropped a little bit, but it is falling very sharply now. And we have to worry about the savings and investment rate falling. But I want to come now into COVID today, how that's changing the world and what might that do. I'm looking at my watch as well. Okay. Oh, I know what's happened. Okay, can you all see this reasonably clearly?
So we can, if you
I can make it a bit bigger.
Yeah. If you click play from current slide, maybe it'll come full screen.
With my just stretching it out, if that's good.
This is good. This is good.
This is from current slide.
Yes.
Yeah, that's probably.
That will be nice.
Oh,
yes,
you're very good at it, Priyanka. You have to give me advice whenever I'm doing this for any lecture. Okay. I'm showing you the number that I look at most. We are all obsessed with COVID data. I get up every morning looking at global COVID data. The number that I've come to, numbers I've come to look at most frequently to understand comparatively where countries stand is COVID deaths per million population. You know, if you look at total COVID deaths, or total number of people infected with COVID, it's alarming for India. Anyway, India is doing very badly on the COVID management. We can't get away from that. But it looks even more alarming because India is a very big country. So all the totals will look very, very large. So in terms of infection, which is spreading and spreading in a way that which should never have happened, we owe this to ourselves, but I'll come to that. If you look at, take per million, so you're normalizing for population, every country, and how many people have died thus far because of COVID. Belgium, 847, UK, 674, etc. We know that Germany has performed very well. Denmark has performed very well. Norway has performed very well. But Germany and Denmark, let's look at it as good performing European economies, 110 per million. If you compare India with North America and North Europe, India looks very good, 23 per million, way less than what has happened there. But what you have to understand is this is not true just of India. It's true for all of Asia and all of Africa. And I'm filling you in now with numbers about Asian and African countries, a random selection, but I have not chosen to get you confused. It is roughly what's happening in the world. India was 23, Pakistan is 26, Bangladesh 17, it's deaths. China 3, Ethiopia 2, Thailand 0.8, Sri Lanka 0.5. So India's doing, actually, if you take the entire Africa and Asia, India's doing quite badly in this region. Now, here is one completely puzzle in my head to do with epidemiology. I don't have an answer, and I don't think anyone has an answer. I'm guzzling and reading a lot of the material that is coming out. The difference between Asia and Africa and Europe and United States can't be fully explained in terms of policies. Lockdown was done differently or this. It's just too systematic and too big a difference. In India, it's 23 people have died. In Belgium, it's 847. And this is true of virtually all of Europe, and this is true of virtually all of Asia and Africa. It can't be just that. What is the reason? I don't know. Age structure plays a role. Asia and Africa are much younger. Younger people are less likely to be fatally affected by this. That's there. But I feel there has to be something else. And I do personally feel it's possible that the tuberculosis and the vaccination that we've taken against that, maybe something with malaria, this entire belt could have some kind of a protection from that. We don't know. We can't take chances. Another thing is possible, as people will tell you, is that all these countries may be at the foothills of where Europe and America is. They will get there. I find that a bit puzzling, first of all, because it has been in the foothills now for 6 months. Why is that? That itself needs some explanation. Why is it coming slowly? And a country like Ethiopia, I deliberately have Ethiopia here because I want to talk about it. Ethiopia is a country that has huge amounts of exposure to China. So initially there was a worry that since Ethiopia interacts so much with China, it's going to blow up in Ethiopia. It has not done so. Okay, so in India, when the lockdown came, I was hopeful to start with. I thought that when the lockdown came out, absolutely in the first days, I thought that good, we have reacted quickly. And I was sure that with this massive lockdown, India's lockdown by most measures was the most total lockdown, that there must be a lot of backup plans that have been made. And we do know that countries which were using the backup plans. For instance, South Africa went for a lockdown almost as severe as India's lockdown, but it immediately went into a war footing of building more hospitals, building medical supplies. In India, that has happened very, very poorly. India, of course, Kerala remains an exemplary state. Kerala has done extraordinarily well. In terms of hospital readiness, Delhi does reasonably well. Mumbai is doing reasonably well, but there are large tracts which have not done well. So we did not do that. Then the biggest problem was something which will go down in history as a very, very big failure. And I still today can't understand how we did that. Lockdown announced with a 4-hour notice seemed like a strong action. You'd expect a lot of plans there onwards. But within weeks, we realized that masses of workers, laborers, migrants have been left with no plans, that they'll be losing their jobs. How do they go back home? And this becomes, of course, one of the biggest tragedies in India. How it happened, we don't know. I wrote a piece with Ella Ben, Ella Bhatt, we wrote jointly, just expressing distress. How did we do this? At one level, there is an element of insensitivity, which has always been with us. The workers, the poorest workers, a lot of them come from agricultural communities in rural areas. They travel hundreds of miles to find work. We have always been insensitive to agriculture, agrarian problems that is far away. We sit in cities and draft policies. So it is that. But this time what happened, which was making global news of Indian migrants, the poorest Indians being stranded for weeks, became a tragedy. And you can look at I'm giving you the data of cases. This is not death. Be careful how you're reading, is number of people who have been infected with COVID in India. And this vertical line is where the lockdown starts. And it's exponential growth after that. Clearly, the lockdown has not worked. If you look at deaths, I prefer to look at COVID deaths rather than COVID infection, because COVID infection, a country that does not do enough tests will not get that figure. A country that does will get a disproportionate figure. Whereas death, is better measured. It's not completely certain, but better measured. And here is COVID deaths per million. The same trend is just going up sharply. And I feel that initial lockdown, the policy mistake that we made, we are paying a huge price for that. We now know that it has spread to rural areas, and it's beginning to pick up in rural areas. And so the policy blunder of that, those about 2-3 weeks when we did a lockdown without having the supporting plans. With a lockdown, you need supporting plans. Without that, caused this to go overboard. And I want to give you a comparative figure. With Ethiopia, Ethiopia used to interest me a lot for a very interesting reason. When in end March, the lockdown happened, I just felt the lockdown has to be nuanced lockdown. You lock down certain things, you don't lock down others. You have lots of policy measures in place which are detailed. What India did was imitating the West and trying to do even better. Ethiopia did something different, and Ethiopia was getting a lot of criticism from the West because Ethiopia did not close down altogether. It kept its transportation going. Its airlines were going. There was a huge marketplace, a closed-door marketplace, where Ethiopia took the decision that they are not going to close down the full market. What they will do is they'll move it and make it an open-air market so that people can still come and buy with social distancing in place. It was getting a lot of criticism that the lockdown was not severe enough. Now, if you look at, I'll just look at the deaths per million. This is the red line is Ethiopia. The blue line is India. And the Ethiopian lockdown came, here is the red line. So India's lockdown comes here. Ethiopia's lockdown comes about 3 weeks, 2-3 weeks after India. And these are the Ethiopian numbers over here. So very, very different from what you're seeing. Sorry, I made a mistake. That's the total number of cases in Ethiopia and India, and total number of deaths. In India is the blue line, Ethiopia is the red line. So that's the picture over there. That's the end of the slideshow. So I'm going to just speak freely for another 15 minutes. I hope that is all right. And that's it. Now, during this period of the lockdown, India's economy has suffered in a big way, bigger than should have been. We made a total lockdown and they did not open up sufficiently after that. So if you look at the unemployment figures, the numbers that we have on unemployment, the best numbers we are getting now is from CMIE. India's unemployment in April and May shoots up to over 20%, 23% or 24% is unemployment rate, which is about the highest in the world. It has come down after that, I have to say. June and July, it has come down. It's settling to higher than what it was pre-COVID. So unemployment is quite high, but it has spiked during this time. In response to our policy also of over monitoring the economy, I mean, the lockdown was done with a kind of monitoring. I think that was also shaking up people that are we going back into license permit Raj? We Indians, and this has been a long problem of India for a long time, have had that tendency for license permit and bureaucratic control. But license permit Raj with bureaucracy controlling is worrying. But license permit Raj with political control is even more worrying. And I think there was a worry that are we getting back into a controlled economy with the over control that we were seeing, the number of regulations being put out. The Economist magazine did some count, some 2,000 regulatory instructions were given out during this time. And you can see that capital flow, which we were expecting is going to come into India out of China, has not happened. In fact, in the month of March, the biggest capital outflow India has ever seen took place, $16 billion exiting from India. We are seeing countries like Vietnam, to a little bit Mexico, couple of Thailand beginning to pick up the investments. China is once again getting investment going in as a country that is stabilizing. India is not seeing any of the benefits out of this. And I feel these must be the kinds of reasons which is making people around the world begin to forecast now a very low growth year for India ahead, coming up now. The policies, there is a lack of professional policies which we saw during this time, which is of concern, which has troubled India. What I want to do is point out that, as I mentioned earlier, the savings and investment rates have gone down in India. That's affecting growth. the scope that we have in terms of our strong industries, the health sector, the IT sector, they will need the market to function, and the market to function cannot have the heavy hand of government. You have to create space for the market to function. And I'm beginning to worry that, having seen the trend even before the pandemic came on, that maybe that India will bungle. But I want to give you this warning because I want all of us to sit up and not make the mistakes that we have already made, which has brought down our growth so much, but begin to make corrections. India's poor management of the pandemic and the economy over the last 6 months worries me. And it worries all observers of India around the world. The pandemic is hopefully just a short-term problem. I know I'm among the more optimistic people, but unfortunately, even if the pandemic goes, there are deeper worries in the case of India's economy that we may not be able to pick up on these fundamental strengths because of non-fundamental weaknesses. So I'm saying all this in the hope that we will make corrections now. A sign of India's problems, India's sharp slowdown, is that it started 2 years before the pandemic, as I mentioned earlier, so it was already there. To understand this, we must recognize that the economy does not rely on economic policies alone. So there is a bit of a lack of professionalism, which India was known for in its policies, that's affecting us, but it's not just economics alone. The economy depends on social norms, on political culture, on institutions, on morals. And I do believe, and I'm taking off my economist hat to talk, that these things are beginning to affect India. And these are deteriorating in India visibly from 2016 and almost in tandem with the drop in growth. So growth rate is coming down and these institutions are worsening in India. They are going together. If these trends are not reversed, the Indian dream will come to an end. There is a lot of writing on the importance of trust. Francis Fukuyama has written that, market regulations, fiscal policy, monetary policy, all those things play a role. But there are other things which play a role. Trust is one of them. Ordinary people being able to trust one another. Societies that have more trust have higher growth. And it's not actually easy to understand. I can write down a game theory model to show the importance of trust. In life, how many things can you write down a formal contract? I will give you this and you supply me with this. We do that for big contracts. But everyday life is full of trust. I'm going to pay you this much money. Will you do this for us? These kinds of deals depend on trust. And as Fukuyama points out, societies which have trust do better because these kinds of oiling of the machinery of the economy goes on better. We've seen this happen in Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries doing very well, but this is not something that is genetically hardwired. I personally believe nothing is really racially different from one group to another, one religious group to another. We are all fundamentally similar human beings, but we can pick up some of these better traits through training, through discourse, through putting our minds to it. And trust is something which earlier used to be there in Scandinavian countries, but now we find huge amount of that in Japan, in East Asia, in South Korea, and these are also booming economies. With the politics of hate and divisiveness, we are eating into the fabric of our society. Trust, which is such a critical glue for success, is eroding. If you do not feel wanted, why will you trust society? The alienation of Kashmir is a case in point. As an Indian, I want Kashmir to be a part of India, but I want it to be a part of India by winning over the Kashmiris so that they want to be a part of India. And that's the spirit in which we have to approach each and every human being within the country. I'm not a political person. I've never been a member of any political party. I keep getting trolls attacking me for being a part of the Congress or the Communist Party. I've never been a member of any political party. Because I cannot take, it's a very simple reason, it's my academic freedom. I can't take the discipline of the party, saying this is the way you have to think and speak. As a researcher, I like the pursuit of ideas and truth. Whether or not it violates the party line, I want to take that. As an individual, I value the importance of having a moral compass. By morals, I don't mean religion. I mean a basic sense of honesty and integrity. I mean having compassion and kindness for anybody, irrespective of a person's religion, caste, race, sexual orientation. You have to treat people equally. And these kinds of morals and integrity are important, not just as ends in themselves, but for economic growth. And I feel some erosion on this is affecting us. Returning to the importance of ideas and truth, it is a matter of tribute to Manmohan Singh, Dr. Manmohan Singh, former Prime Minister, that he invited me as chief economic advisor to his government, knowing full well that I did not belong to any party and was often very critical of his government's decisions and policies. Not about all decisions. In fact, I feel there were also huge successes, but I was critical on many decisions. For him, what was important was that I should bring the best ideas to the table. I got proof of this in a very interesting way in 2011, when I wrote a paper. This has been written about a lot, and some of you may have heard this. I wrote a paper arguing that India's Prevention of Corruption Act, which is a 1988 act, ought to be amended. In particular, when someone has to pay a bribe for something that is that person's right. I have a right to this, but I still have to pay a bribe. I call these harassment bribes. In such cases, I argued that the bribe giver ought not to be punished. Only the bribe taker, the civil servant or politician or police who's taking the bribe, should be punished. So punishment should be one-sided. This paper caused a furor, with members of parliament writing letters to the Prime Minister, to the Finance Minister, then to Pranab Mukherjee, and asking that I should be asked to leave government for such an immoral idea. In the midst of all this, one Saturday, very vivid memories I have, in 2011, I got a phone call from Barkha Dutt, asking me to appear on her television show. I think those days it was called We the People, and to explain and debate my idea. You know our television show. Most of you are the audience, I'm presuming, from India. Indian television shows are slanging matches, but I don't quite mind them. I can be there and talk. I enjoy even people attacking. I do enjoy those exchanges. But before saying yes to Barkha, I thought I would ask the Prime Minister if it was fine with my appearing on TV, because I typically did not like to ask permission for these matters. This was my decision. I would take it. But I know that the Prime Minister had got a lot of grief with people writing to me about me. So I thought I should ask him. This was a Saturday. I called his residence and left a message. 15 minutes later, he came on the line. I told Dr. Singh about my dilemma about going on television over this. He immediately cut me down. He said, actually, he has read about my idea in newspapers. He had not read my article, in newspapers. And he said he disagreed with me. I tried to argue a little bit, but how much can you argue with the Prime Minister? I argued a little bit, but I gave up. He said, no, he did disagree with me. But then, before hanging up, he said something which rings in my head. He said, however, even though I disagree with you, that is no reason for you not to express your opinion. The role of an advisor is to bring ideas to the table. So feel free to go on TV and defend and explain your idea. This was a memorable moment for me. This was the India to be proud of, an open society, a society where diverse ideas could flourish. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful example of Manmohan Singh's self-confidence and strength, in the real sense of the term strength, that he could allow such diversity, including contestation of his own views, to get space and to be discussed. I recall after that, I had gone to a G20 meeting. Montek used to be involved in very serious ways in G20. I used to be involved in a G20 meeting where I was talking about this, and the representatives from America and Germany were telling me that India must be the only developing country with this kind of space and freedom, and I really felt proud of it. But this is breaking down. This is breaking down in India. To take one example, UP, Uttar Pradesh, is an example of the breakdown of social cohesion. This is doing huge damage to India's global image. UP was once a state in the lead. The universities and institutes in Allahabad, Lucknow, and Varanasi were the thought leaders of India. And I'm not talking about 5,000 years ago. Barely 100 years ago, people from around India and also from the world, there were several who would come to these universities. Economists probably know that the famous Stanley Jevons' son settled down in Allahabad and started India's first journal of economics. This is a region where Rabindranath Tagore and Swami Vivekananda spent long stretches of time. The breakdown has happened for a while, but what has happened over the last 2-3 years in UP is disturbing. The breakdown in law and order, the rise in religious bigotry, the preaching of hatred against minorities, the silencing of dissent goes against India's own tradition. If Swami Vivekananda was around today, I have no doubt in my mind, no doubt, that he would shudder at what is happening and the hatred that is being preached in the name of his religion. I grew up in a traditional Indian household, but a household in which I was taught that we must treat all human beings as equal. People had the right to practice the religion of their choice or not practice any religion if they so chose. The achievement of India after 1947 was staggering. India's economic policies and political policies were somewhat unusual. A secular democracy, an open society with freedom of press and speech was a remarkable achievement. One marvels at what Gandhi and Nehru managed to establish. Among the many, many nations that gained independence in the first half of the 20th century, a 70-year run with such a vibrant democracy, modern scientific attitude, openness to different ideas and religions, and an attempt to embrace all human beings as part of India, as Rabindranath Tagore wrote and emphasized in the Gitanjali, has no parallels. I have a request to all those people who are trolling and attacking all the time on this, who are so proud of India's achievements 5,000 years ago. Take a little pride in India's achievements of the last 70 years. The whole world used to look up to this. On economic policies, mistakes were made. There can't be denial. Mistakes which were the thought of that time. While we nurtured higher education and science very well, we ignored basic literacy. We created a license permit Raj which slowed down economic growth. But all that was beginning to change. India's growth picked up from 1993 after the reforms, massive pickup after the reforms of Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh. Then growth picked up again in 2003. A lot of the tribute for this goes to Vajpayee, and by 2006, India was among the world's 3 fastest growing economies. From 2016, it has been a steady downward erosion. 1 or 2 factors have origins before this government came to power. So I'm not saying that everything is happening now. There are things that was happening, I already mentioned, that the savings rate was going down during our time. It had reached a great height. It was beginning to come down. Why did that happen? Don't fully know. India was beginning to look like East Asian countries. But I think one thing does play a role is that if people feel insecure, if people don't feel cohesive, they don't invest. Investment is a bit of a trust and faith in society. So the sharp drop in investments, little bit of drop happened while I was in government, but a much sharper drop subsequently probably has something to do with that. But over and above that, the breakdown of the social and political complements of economic progress is beginning to hurt India. The breakdown in trust, the increased insecurity of ordinary people are beginning to affect us. Let me conclude. Let me wish to all of you, not just Indians, but anyone, anywhere who is listening to me, the very best in these dismal times. I wish you all well. These are dreadful times. I hope my listeners come out well, feeling better, and the COVID and the pandemic passes. Let me fully take my economist's hat off and appeal to all of you with whom we share this tiny planet. Let us pause, take stock of what we are doing, including what we are doing wrong, why we are causing a moral degradation of society and destroying the environment through overexploitation. Let us use this pandemic as occasion to pause, think, and try to leave the world a better place for our descendants and all future inhabitants. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. Ahluwalia, I would request you to please touch your screen and unmute your mic. It's on the left-hand side corner of your screen.
Is that unmuted? Can you hear
Yes,
me?
we can
Okay.
hear you, sir. Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much, Kaushik, for a an impassioned and actually very interesting lecture. My job is really to moderate in the sense of throw some questions at you. I've looked at the questions that have come on the screen, and as invariably, they reflect a huge variety of opinion. I mean, there are some people who say, is this the time to renationalize companies? And there are others who say, is this the time to do more privatization? There are questions about fiscal expansion. How much expansion should we have in order to run a credible stimulus? There are issues about closing the economy. Is that a good idea? Is it not a good idea? There are questions about should we have a universal basic income? And I mean, there are issues on, what post-COVID, what would be the nature of global governance that makes sense? Because I think you've talked a lot about lack of trust within the country, but there's enormous lack of trust in the global society also across countries. So many of these issues are really also global issues. And I mean, one person wants to know, are we still going to hit $5 trillion size of economy by 2025? Now, we have another 15 minutes or something like that. And I don't think you can possibly answer the 102 questions that I see listed there. So let me just pose a couple of things to you, which come out of these. And I'm not going to mention the names of people because several people have asked similar questions. First, let's look at the whole issue of fiscal expansion. One of the concerns that people have is that on the one hand, the scale of the fiscal stimulus in the Western world is enormous. We have a stimulus which is a mixture of monetary and fiscal. So when you combine the two, it looks like 10% of GDP. But the pure fiscal component of that is nearer about 1% of GDP. So the first question is, do you think to manage this pandemic and its impact on the domestic economy, that there should be an expansion in the fiscal component of the stimulus? And if so, obviously that must mean that the central government must do more borrowing. And do you think that that borrowing should be monetized in the sense that the Reserve Bank simply picks up those bonds? Now, whether they do it directly or indirectly doesn't matter. In the end, do they monetize? So that's one big question, which I think people would value your opinion on. No, go ahead, and then
yeah, I had my mute on. So I'm not taking on the earlier questions that you read out. Maybe if there's 5 minutes time in the end about nationalization.
Yeah, no, we'll come back to those.
We'll come back to this. So let me just take this on. See, the package that was announced, the absolute number by the Prime Minister, again, that day I felt good that we needed a very big amount of fiscal stimulus, and the Prime Minister's number that he mentioned, which was a huge number, that was the right direction to go. But as you are rightly pointing out, that as you dissect, you realize that very small part of it is really a straight fiscal stimulus. A lot of it is loan waivers and things like that, which don't amount to the same thing. Generally, my view is that the fiscal stimulus should be bigger than what is India's giving. And one slightly dangerous policy is the former governor of RBI, Subba Rao, and others have written about this. It's a bit of a dangerous thing, but I feel some monetization at this point of time is worth it. So let me just, since it's a larger audience, basically, when the government is spending more, if you do the spending by picking up money from different sources, that's not monetizing. But if you, in some sense, literally print money to give government a greater space for expenditure, that is, you're monetizing and allowing greater fiscal stimulus. I am in favor only because this is a very special situation, a limited period of limited monetization of the deficit, which will allow the government to build up the deficit. You have to be very careful for two reasons. One is, government getting a bite into printing money is always very risky. You begin to then print money for all the wrong reasons because you're being allowed to print money. So once you open that door, you have to be very careful. Number two, if it triggers of inflation, controlling inflation, and I should know this, I did this for 3 years in India, that was the major problem. Once inflation gets triggered, it's very difficult to hold back in. So you have to be very cautious, but this is a situation where a larger fiscal deficit and monetization of part of it, this is something I think worth it.
Yeah, that's very clear as usual. You know, on this other issue, is this the time to save industries by nationalizing them? Or is this the time to actually do more privatization? Because you get both viewpoints. So what would be your view on that?
Actually, this is a big challenge, and I'm doing a very big paper with colleagues here at Cornell from the law department and my PhD students in economics on the nationalization question comes up. In general, I should tell you that the ideological position that some people take on, that everything should be nationalized and state-owned, everything should be left to the market, I don't agree with either. Everything being nationalized, first of all, is a deadly risky move, because once you centralize it all in the hands of the state, it invariably gets captured by a few people. USSR was the best example of that. Starting from 1917, you centralize everything, and a small group of crony capitalists in the end capture the pot that has been collected by the state. Never make that mistake, getting it all together. In general, I'm in favor of taxation. You have to tax the rich, transfer the money to the poor, but allowing markets to function. That's broadly the rule, and the private sector has to be there, the firms have to be there. One thing, Montek, I'll tell you, time is running short. The digital firms are causing a problem, not just in India, all over the world. When you have these mega digital firms, Amazon, through which you have to trade and do everything through Amazon, how do you deal with Amazon? This is a question where you may have to think of very radical policies. After all, you have to remember that something through which everyone has to, a door through which everyone has to go to survive in the economy, those doors, we don't like to leave it to the private sector. The Indian Reserve Bank was a privately owned bank to start with, but you realize that the money creating authority can't be a private one. So there will be the big questions coming, but once again, this is not an ideological matter to scream on either side. This is the kind of matter where you have to do detailed thinking, never make the mistake of centralizing everything, nor make the mistake of thinking that everything can be left to the wild market and it'll function. Yeah.
The third question that I want to pose to you, which again is being debated, and there's some reflection of that in the questions that came up on the screen, is that, you know, globally, there seems to be a sort of an anti-globalization flavor. Now, maybe the US election later in the year will alter that, but so far, it's been anti-globalization. And in practice, some of that has been reflected even in Europe, though not with the same nationalistic tones, etc. So, you know, in India, there's a view that since the reforms were really driven by the desire to integrate with the world, because we were, after all, one of the most closed economies. So a lot of people are saying, well, maybe we should now go back and become more closed. In other words, raise protectionist barriers. And somewhere in the back of people's minds is the belief that somehow China is an unfair player. But of course, then the solution is you raise protectionist barriers against everybody. I mean, if you think China is doing something which is unfair, you can always have a tariff against Chinese imports, you know, following whatever the rules are to determine unfair trade. But the reaction seems to be, no, we must kind of raise the tariff. In fact, the Atmanirbhar scheme, you know, the slogans associated with it sometimes sound as if it's a return to protectionism. Sometimes, on the other hand, it's said that this is a way of strengthening the economy, which of course is a good thing. And indeed, when the Prime Minister mentioned it, he even said, I want India to be part of global supply chains. And you can't be part of a global supply chain if you're raising tariff barriers. So do you feel that in this area, there is something that I'm not talking now about government, that you need to get the Indian public and the Indian thinkers to think about? What should be our strategy in terms of remaining open? Considering that even before the pandemic, despite the liberalization, we were much less open than many other countries because we had much higher tariff barriers.
Yeah. So actually, from the tone of your question, I feel we are on the same page on this. So I'm going to repeat a little bit with adding a couple of things on. Overall, I feel that closeness is not a good idea. So if you want a one-line answer, and when in 1991, India brought down the tariffs, began opening up, capital flows were being eased up. At that time, I was in a minority saying that that's the right thing. Minority because my sympathies are generally with the left, that we want a world with much greater equality. But that has nothing to do with that. So I felt the opening up and is an important thing to have a more efficient market. And then you want greater equality. So I was with that. I take the same view here. And here is what I fear, that for a period, it's going to get worse. US, it's going to depend critically on whether Trump comes back. If Trump comes back, I feel it's going to get worse with China. And we may begin to see closing of the American door taking place. And if America's closing its door, China indulging in unfair trade practices, Europe will have to cluster and do something. It'll become a balkanized world. The reason, this will be more worrying than what's happened in the past, but the reason why I feel this will not last for too long is I take a couple of historical examples, two which are stand out in my head. In the early 20th century, Argentina was, there are many writings that Argentina would become the world's fastest, richest country. And actually around World War I, Argentina was among the 10 richest countries in the world, slightly poorer than America, but among the 10 richest countries. From 1930 to 1934, Argentina went for into a hyper-nationalistic period. Tariff walls shooting up, stopping people from coming. And I think it did damage beyond calculation, and United States outstripped it. Mid-1980s, you will remember this, there was a 1 year, 1985 or 86, where Japan's per capita income was almost America's per capita income. And it was being written about that Japan is going to outstrip. For Japan, it was not hyper-nationalism, but the openness that the United States had, skills coming in, best inputs coming in, United States outcompeted it. If the United States goes for a relatively closed economy, I feel within 2-3 years, the American dream will begin to crash. European countries, which will remain open in an intelligent way, will outcompete United States. China will outcompete because China will put very measured, targeted closings, and opening up others will outcompete. So for India, you don't want to go the route of the countries that are failing with this. Open economy is the route that you have to have. You have to have an open economy, intelligently done. Yes, you may have to use your tariffs, block something where you're getting unfair competition. But more than anything else, if you develop scientific strength, scientific fervor, the country takes off, it becomes a strong country. Montek, I'm just, a couple of years ago when I was in China, in Xiamen University, when I was in the government of India. So nowadays, no journalist will come to talk to me. Those days, a journalist rushed to me to talk to me and asked me, very softly, he said, what is the secret of India's soft power? And there was almost an envy that India has a soft power stature in the world, and United States, quite apart from its military and all, has a soft power stature because of its higher education. The whole world goes there. For India, the strength is openness with a scientific temper, develop the higher education research. I feel India can come out on top and does not have to worry about closing down. And closing down anyway will lead to failure, as happened in Argentina, as happened in many other countries.
Well, that's a very, very clear and unambiguous kind of answer. And I hope that your audience thinks about it and discusses it. I mean, I share exactly your view, as you rightly hinted. So let me make it clear that I agree with what you say. Yeah. I mean, in that sense, you know, we have in the last couple of years raised tariffs, which is in my view regrettable. We have walked out of RCEP, which in my view is regrettable, because one of the big things was, you know, in order not to make opening up look like integration with the West, we had said, initially we had said, look east, then we had said, act east, but we seem to have done exactly the opposite. And I think how China plays out is very uncertain. So it's quite clear that there are huge uncertainties in this area, and we need to watch them carefully. One last question. You know, the standard argument, I mean, the argument that you're making that the policies that would maximize growth remain good policies, and if they don't generate the distribution you want, then change the distribution through progressive taxation. And I share that view. And a lot of people are now suddenly saying, should we introduce universal basic income? Now, by the way, they're not actually saying, we want to remain open, therefore let us introduce you. It's sort of let's close down, let's shutter it up, and also introduce universal basic income. But suppose we were to maintain this openness. You know, there's a difference in our situation. There's a difference between doing more to look after the poor by creating a social safety net, by doing better on education, providing better health, etc., and simply providing a universal basic income. So what is your view for India in its present situation on universal basic income?
Yeah. Montague, and for the audience, placing a floor so that no one goes below that floor is important. I think all reasonable people will share that. How do you do that? And I think that there should be a universal basic income only because in India, when you go to sufficiently poor people, you don't know who is how poor. So a universal basic income is wasteful. You're giving people money to lots of people who don't really need that money, but you're saving on trying to find out who is poor, who is not. I would keep that to a very small component, which is the universal basic income. But here is the kind of thing that I would do. But this again applies more to rich countries. I feel a time has come when for big mega profit companies, you need more dispersed shareholding laws. So I don't care if a company becomes very wealthy, if that wealth is being shared by lots of shareholders. So more than universal basic income, I have sympathy with universal basic income as a floor that no one goes below, is some kind of trusteeship of shareholding by the state. And this was original ideas. You'll remember Marty Weitzman wrote about the shared economy. And after that, Feldman has written, the people have written about this. But now it's a political need. And even newspapers like New York Times are beginning to write that if a part of the profit is kept by the government on behalf of people, so people are almost holding shares. So it's a similar thing, but it's through shareholding of the profits being generated, a fraction going to them is what I would go for. And I've done some technical writing, but placing a floor, I agree. But what you're saying is these things very often come pulled together. Close down the economy, shut down big firms and put a floor. Economy will collapse. You will budgetarily, you won't be able to sustain the universal basic income. If you collapse the economy, the universal basic income has to come from somewhere, and never make the mistake of printing money to do that, because prices will keep rising. Every time you print money and give people as universal basic income, there's one historic example, 1943 Bengal famine. A lot of it was cash was being handed over to farmers. But when there is one commodity that you're competing for, food, because you need that, cash becomes useless, because every time you give them cash, the price of food rises just enough to exclude them so that the rich get it. In the end, the price keeps rising, so it won't work. So there are practical considerations, and this is, again, you have to combine heart with thinking, and people very often miss out on that in this particular policy.
Very good, thank you. I don't know, Alak, do we have more time for a question or no?
Yes. I think you can go for 10 minutes more.
Okay, 10 minutes more. All right. Then, you know, one issue that I think is relevant to ask in this situation is, you know, we talk about taxation, but in the world of mobile capital, I mean, you talked about how to handle big companies. I mean, I agree with you that the scale, the network effects and the scale of these big companies gives them a huge amount of sheer economic power. And of course, Stiglitz also worries that behind the economic power is a lot of political power, and how do they use that? But even if you don't worry about the political power, the economic power is enormous and it can be very distortionary. But you know, how do you sort of discipline big companies if everybody doesn't discipline them? So I mean, that's linked up to the question of global governance.
Yeah.
Are we moving towards a kind of an essential global consensus on the kind of world we want, so that these policies would be common across countries, and big companies wouldn't be able to solve the problem by just shifting base? Yeah. Now, this was very much part of thinking at one time, but with the erosion of the sense of a global consensus, I really don't know where things are heading. Yeah. Of course, that linked to that is the other problem, that what on earth do you do with tax havens? Because whatever you do, there will always be tax havens. So you'll find that the headquarters of Google and Amazon and what have you will always be in tax havens.
Yeah. Montek, this is such an important question. I want to also explain to the audience so they don't misunderstand this. It's very easy. We do that often. When you see problems, great inequality in your own country, and you see big corporations, some of them very exploitative, you say, well, have taxes, have rules and regulations. You miss out on one thing, that today's world, especially for big corporations, is a very fluid place. They will go and park themselves elsewhere and you will lose them altogether. This is actually such a hard question. Small firms, you can manage this way. Put regulations, tax them, they have nowhere to go. But the biggest ones, which are crucial for the modern world, they will just go fly elsewhere with their capital and base themselves. What do you do about this? It's such a hard question that very often I don't even like to look that way. But I don't want to make the mistake which some people make, is not think about it and pretend as if they are going to be rooted here. And historically, mistakes of that kind, North Korea was blocking all big players and trying to put special rules on them. They became a country free of big players in a complete mess of a closed economy. So you can't make that. What do you do? I don't know. And this is one area where I feel this could cause a collapse in the global economy, because we can't politically get into a global mode where countries talk to one another and have a consensus policy around the world is possible, in which case the world order could collapse simply because corporations have become so big, no government can control, and the governments can't even get together because of the political power. It's entirely possible. I've got a very abstract paper I'm writing with a co-author called The Dinosaur Risk, that there are things changing in the world. And if we don't attend to that, we can face the risk that the dinosaurs faced. And the dinosaurs did not have the ability to analyze themselves. We should do that, but there's no guarantee we'll solve it. This is one of those. My only hope is good, sensible leadership will prevail. And we will need the kind of activism we show within our country, political activism. We need now players who will show this kind of activism globally. Reach out to leaders and say, look, G20 was a small effort compared to the challenge we face, but G20 played a role in 2008, a major role. We have to get together because this problem is a global problem. No country will be able to solve it on its own. The small countries, it's impossible. Big countries like China and India, some hope you can cut off the rest and be poorer, but still manage. But smaller countries will not be able to manage. So I don't know. But I don't want to belittle this and ignore the problem as some people do. And I feel this is a time for global thinking. One is hope that we will get global leaders from United States to Brazil to Philippines to Turkey to Hungary, global leaders who have a sense of globalization. They talk to one another for a better world. If that does not happen, ordinary people should be activists, realize that you can't just get angry with your own nation. This is a global problem and attend to that. So there isn't an answer I'm giving, Montek, but I think you'll appreciate there isn't an easy answer.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think that's actually one of the most interesting things. You know, India will be the host of the G20 in, I think, 2022. So 2 years from now. So it'll be interesting to see by then. By then, I assume by then, the pandemic will be over. And maybe hopefully there'll even be a vaccine, although how many people will have got it by then is not very clear. But certainly the rich who travel will have been able to get it. So I think that would be an interesting moment for India to actually play a role and give a message. That what is our message in terms of global? The problem with global cooperation is it's always give and take. So I mean, you know, we need to be willing to say this is what we're willing to give.
Right.
Right. I think one of the most damaging things with globalization, or the concept of globalization, are the rules that got agreed under the WTO. The rules which said an asymmetric approach. That is, you have to liberalize and multilateralize all your benefits and do it reciprocally, whereas developing countries have no such obligation. And for too many years, our strategy on trade was based on the assumption that anything good that happens, we will benefit from, and nobody has a right to expect us to do anything in return. Now that actually changed a few years ago, but I don't think we conceptually changed our thinking. I mean, in a way, by not being willing to change, we may have contributed to the demise of WTO. Because, you know, you set up a system of consensus that everybody needs to consent. This gives each person a veto. So if you exercise the veto on everything that the big fellows want, all they do is walk out of it, which is what Trump is doing. So, I mean, there are real issues, how this global architecture can be put together again. And India has a great opportunity because we will be hosting the G20 in 2022. Right. So are we in a position to give a genuine new signal? It'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've run out of time, Kaushik, on behalf of the 500 people on this link and the couple of thousand who must have been watching you on YouTube. Let me simply say thank you very much. As always, fascinating to hear from you. And I certainly got a lot of my questions answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Priyanka, you are mute and can
Yes.
you unmute yourself?
Yes, unmuted. Okay, so on behalf of the organizers, I would like to say a big thank you to you, Professor Basu, for such an engaging and enriching lecture. And thank you, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, for moderating this web lecture and making it so engaging. And as I always, in the end, give some numbers, we had a full capacity on Zoom. On YouTube, close to 645 people have engaged with us, and the numbers are increasing. The videos will be out on the YouTube in an hour, and we will send out the links to all the participants as well. So thank you very much. For me personally, thank you so much, sir. It is an honor and a privilege to share screen space with all the stalwart economists of this country right now. We can see on the screen. A few thank yous, because every event has a big team which works, So on our social media front, Dr. Aditi Madan has been helping us from our team. We have Dania Lovesi, backend, our design and branding by Arzu Saifi and Mohammad Wahid, who's always there, who's helping out with the web invitations. And our team here, Jyoti Girish, Vijay Lal, Vikas Dubey, and everyone. And of course, the whole team led by Professor Alakhen Sharma, who has made all this possible. And thank you so much to all the participants. Thank you for your overwhelming response to our lectures. And I'm very proud to announce our next lecture, which is on 7th August, which is by Professor Guy Standing. And he will be speaking on the ethical and economic case for basic income in time of pandemics. We look forward to your support for our future lectures as well. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahluwalia, Professor Basu, and Professor Alakhen Sharma. See you at the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kaushik. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Ahluwalia, thank you very much. You moderated so well, made very interesting. Kaushik, super.
It was interesting. It was.
Yes.